My name is Ryan Cooper. I'm very honored to be here as we recognize the many individuals who had a hand and took literally decades to help get us to this point today. Some 144 survivors, witnesses, and liberators have been interviewed. Their accounts have been preserved on hundreds of hours of audio, and their stories, where they lived, their experiences during the Holocaust, and how they came to St. Louis have been cataloged on the Oral Histories website, which you all will be a chance to be among the first members of the public to experience and access that website when our presentation concludes today. But first, to start, I would like to introduce Jean Cavender, the director of the Holocaust Museum and Learning Center, to tell us more about the project and who we'll be hearing from today.
First, two announcements. One is there will be a reception out in the atrium afterwards. And for those of you who want to experience the Oral Histories Project, we have 4 computers set up in the library, so you'll be able to access that, and there will be people there to be able to help you to access the website. The Oral Histories Project was conceived in November of 1979 and actually began in 1980. There was a cadre of volunteers that was comprised of the following community members: Carl Liss, David Eidelman, Marge Belinsky, Lois Gould, Rabbi Robert Jacobs, Richard Kalfas, Sister Prince, Jean Schaefer, Moisey Schopper, and Lorraine Meyer. Their goal was to study and define what the project was to be and to understand what this project may mean to each individual survivor, the volunteers, and to the educators. The group finally, slowly, and carefully began to interview survivors, and their testimonies were recorded on audio cassette tapes, which was the technology in use at the time. While a number of volunteers began this project, Sister emerged as its leader and continued to work for more than 40 years. And she continues to do that work today. In her own words, our purpose is to never let those stories die. They establish a record testifying that there was a Holocaust and that this tragedy can never be denied nor forgotten. The words of these survivors must be preserved. I want to give a special thanks to Margie Langa Khan and Michael Kahn, who allowed us to use funds given to the museum in the memory of their father-in-law and father to digitize these tapes and preserve them in the 21st century technology. That gift laid the foundation for what we are bringing you today. Lastly, I want to thank Andrew Goldfeder and Diane Everman, who worked tirelessly with Sister to help bring this project to fruition. And Sister has one more thank you.
My thank you is that if Jean Cavender, I'm going to do better on that later. Sorry. I want you to understand very, very. You can put that up here. My third chance.
We kind of determined.
I always had a big mouth, not today. I just want you to understand in the very beginning, all of you to understand that Jean, right here, was inspired to contact a company who could digitize our oral histories tapes. And because of Jean's early work, we have been able to preserve these precious testimonies. So if she hadn't said to me, so I think we need to do these tapes, then it wouldn't be happening. It wouldn't be happening. So you see, we are, and I mean this, one and all, a family. All of these people who did all of these things to get us here and cared deeply for our survivors. And that's it. That's the whole thing. So, all right, I'll do better later.
Harry Lenga was born in 1919 in Kozienice Poland, a small town south from Warsaw. His father had a jewelry business. Harry had 3 brothers and 1 sister. They were Orthodox Jews. Harry attended both public school and religious school, and he also learned watchmaking from his father. When the war broke out, Harry lived in Warsaw. Life got harder day by day. Hunger and disease were rampant. In 1942, Harry's father was taken to a concentration camp. He gave Harry the watchmaking tools, which later on saved Harry's and his brothers' lives several times. The 3 brothers escaped the day before deportation, and they were able to work in a labor camp nearby. After a few weeks, they were transported to Wilanów, another camp in the vicinity of Radom. Remembering the camp in Wilanów, Harry describes the scene when 117 people were selected on a roll call and shot by machine gun. The 3 brothers managed to stay in the camp and do watch repairs. Harry's brother Morris once got typhoid fever, and Harry had to hide him in the barrack. Miraculously, he also managed to get him medicine. Life was very hard. Every day was a struggle for survival for that day, Harry says. Harry and his brothers were eventually transported to Auschwitz. After a week, Harry was sent to dig ditches. In a few weeks, Harry was selected to work in the Sonderkommando, to work in the crematorium. Harry and his brothers had a watch, and they bribed the block commander to take Harry off the list. In January 1945, as the Russian army was approaching, Harry describes a slight change in the Germans' behavior. The inmates were given a little more food. In the middle of January, Harry and his brothers were put on a march. They marched for 3 days, day and night, without stopping and without food. Then they stopped in a farm overnight and marched for another day to a railroad station, where they were finally transported to Mauthausen, a slave labor camp in Austria. When they got there, they had to stay outside in the icy cold for 2 hours, completely naked. A few weeks later, they were transported to Melk, another slave labor camp. The work was very hard. They had to build factories in the mountains. The food was even worse than in Auschwitz. They stayed in Melk until March 1945. Then Harry and his brothers were transferred to Ebensee. They were liberated in Ebensee on May 5th, 1945 by the 3rd American Army. After the war, Harry was in several displaced persons camps: Ebensee, Austria, Modena, Italy, Landsberg, Germany, and Stuttgart, Germany. He came to the United States in April 1949. Harry Lenga lived in St. Louis with his wife and 3 children, and later had 3 grandchildren. He owned a jewelry store in St. Louis for nearly 40 years before he retired. In 1998, he moved with his wife to Israel. Harry Lenga died on January 2nd, 2000, at the age of 80.
Margie Lenga-Kahn sent her regrets. She's unable to be with us today. I'm Dan Rich, Curator and Director of Education at the museum, and it's my honor to read the words of Harry Lenga describing his arrival at Auschwitz. And we stepped out from those cars, and they frightened us with terror with sticks. They had like baseball bats in their hands and sticks. And they tried to, with the rifles, whoever got by too close to them, they hit. And they told us to line up and take everything out. All our belongings, whoever had anything with them, and the wagon should be clean. Then I saw from the other wagons, the cars, they started to carry out dead people. Luckily, in our car, we cooperated with each other. We didn't develop any fights and misunderstandings, so we didn't push each other. And later, they told us what happened in the other cars. The people started to push each other and not to agree with each other, and they started to step on each other. They killed each other. That's exactly how it happened. Anger and frustration. And then, when we were all lined up, and I saw there was one high-ranking officer, a Gestapo guy came by, and I think he must have been that Dr. Mengele. I imagine so. And he came by and he looked us over. And he started to make each one separate. He looked at them and told them to either go to the left side or the right side. And there was plenty of us which were directed to go to the right, and the other ones to the left. Now we were selected to go to the left side, and we formed a column, and they started to tell us to march, and we marched. And of course, we looked around, and we saw those high chimneys in the crematoriums. We saw the fire coming out of the chimney. No matter how high the chimneys were, we saw the fire coming out, spraying out from the chimney. And we thought maybe we didn't know where we're going. We thought maybe that's our last moments already. And they took us to a certain place, which was a big hangar. It looked like, and we stopped there and we found some prisoners too, which some of us knew from before. They were working there. They were working there when the commandos in that place, and some from other towns, and they recognized each other. They said, "Hi, how are you?" And the first thing they told us, "Don't be afraid, you're not going to die. You are the lucky ones. You are selected to work, so don't be afraid." And we still didn't believe them too, because we thought they are, not telling us the truth, because they don't want us to know. So we didn't trust them. But anyway, we were a little bit relieved, but yet we didn't believe all 100% of it, that we weren't going to be gassed.
I would say, all of that, give up all the belongings so that anybody possesses that. Because if not, everybody will be checked, searched, they will find anything, mud or anywhere else, will be shot. The only thing what they told us is to keep our shooting. So, I had a few pictures. My brothers too decided we didn't know what to do. Of course, before we went in, they promised ourselves to hold our work together. That's all in case it's not true, they're going to kill us. Let's stay together. We will know that we died together. And we walked in, and then they came up, they started to shave our hair, the arms and everywhere. And they attacked us with some kind of a solution that was so terrible, that alone, that was very terrible for hours later. But he didn't care. He saw that they are not handling gas like they're going to kill us.
I'm going to play that one more time just so people can hear it. Could you hear that at the end there?
Yeah. Maybe a little louder.
It's as loud as it's going to go, I think.
Thank you.
Finally, they told us to prayers, give up all the belongings so that anybody possesses that. Because if not, everybody will be checked and searched, and if they will find anything in the mud or anywhere else, will be shot instantly. The only thing that they told us is to keep our shoes. So I had a few pictures. My brothers too, we decided we didn't know what to do. Of course, before we went in, we promised ourselves to hold our work together. That's all in case it's not true they're going to kill us. Let's stay together. And we know that we died together. And we walked in, and then they came up and they started to shave our hairs, hair off the heads, and the arms and everywhere. And they attacked us with some kind of a solution that was so terrible, you know, that alone, that was very terrible for hours later. But we didn't care. We saw that they are not handling us like they're going to kill us.
Abe Szydlowski was born in 1913 in Łódź, Poland. He grew up in a neighborhood with both Jewish and German families. He went to a synagogue in his town, and a cheder, where he learned to be religious and practice Judaism with his family. He was fluent in Hebrew and Yiddish, and luckily for him, he could also read, write, and speak perfect German. Once the Nazis invaded and took over Poland, he and his family were moved into the Łódź ghetto. In the ghetto, his parents died of illness, and he struggled to survive. By volunteering to work, he was able to get food to stay alive. He was in the ghetto from start to its end, upon which he was taken in the middle of the night, crowded into cattle cars, and transported to Auschwitz. Once his cattle train arrived in Auschwitz, he and the other people were made to stand naked outside in the midst of winter frost, rain, and snow for 2 or 3 days. After being admitted into the camp, he was shaved, given a uniform, and designated to a barrack. While at Auschwitz, he was lucky to work on a farm, where the farmers would allow them to eat bread and let them sit at a table with food on occasion. He describes his time at Auschwitz as worse than the ghetto, though in both the Germans made the Jews feel like animals and not human beings. He recalls that the focus while in Auschwitz was on staying alive, what you would eat next, and how you could get it. From Auschwitz, Mr. Szydlowski was deported to Dachau, another camp in Germany. He was in an unmarked rail car with 100 other people that was bombed by Allied planes seeking to stop Nazi weapons shipments. Abe was blown out onto a hillside and sustained multiple breaks to his right hip. He was found by Allied soldiers, taken to a hospital for survivors, and spent 9 months in traction. As he healed, he met his wife-to-be Tilly, who was also recovering in the hospital. They married, and then moved to a DP camp where they had a son. The 3 of them emigrated to the US, eventually making their way to St. Louis. They had another son, and peacefully lived out the rest of their lives.
I'm Abe's son. I'm Abe Szydlowski's son. He changed his name to Lo. My father was interviewed by Sister Prince when he was close to 100. So he was the man who remembered a lot of things, but it was a little difficult. You see, he knew Yiddish, Russian, Hebrew, Polish, and German, and English was his 6th language. So, nearing 100, and as such, he remembered things in bits and pieces. So, I will speak for my father with his spirit and his voice. We lived in Łódź, Poland. First of all, Łódź was a big town, 3 million people. But the Germans, they took Jewish people and they put them in the ghetto, the worstest part of Łódź. A broken place, you know, and that's where we have to live. They gave us a portion that you could not live by. They've been sick, they've been broken, and medical health was absolutely nothing. There were no doctors, no nurses, no hospitals. Each can only depend on who's helping us, and that's why people have been dying very, very easily. Whole families died for hunger. That was the worstest thing. And every day we were taken to work, hundreds were dying. When the ghetto started, we'd been under wire, the electric wire. You could not go out and not go in. Depends on everything they give you, what they want to give you. So first of all, they're making us work for them. They made uniforms and everything for the Germans. Oh yeah, for the whole armies. Uniforms were made in the ghetto. But first of all, they stealed and robbed the whole world, the Germans. and brought the material to Lodz, because this time was a war, and material was hard to get, and they know where they would be able to get it. So they got, and we got big tables and electric machines for cutting and making markers and cutting the material and sewing. And we were always living on the worstest conditions. These conditions was, they did not let you have your own will to do nothing, to do anything. And they treat us like animals. And they give you a piece of bread and a cup, like coffee. In the ghetto, my mother, father, sisters, brothers, everybody was there. And they were not very well sometimes because there was no food. Those they got, we had to split our food, which we got. We had to split with them to live. When you first went into the ghetto, they didn't tell you nothing. They just made a place and they put around it a wire, with Stachelruten. Wires with points, so you could hurt yourself, so you don't touch it, you know. It was older people couldn't work, so people who did not work don't have to eat, that's all. A piece of bread was life, even stealing it. If they caught you, they cut your head off. But you did it. You want to stay alive, you do whatever they told you. And they told you to do things you would never have imagined you could do it. Even half-dead people. They could work and worked hard. My parents, they died in the ghetto. They couldn't, and all in their person, it was impossible that they could. The conditions how we've been living and the food that they were giving you, you could not survive, no question. Because they treat you like animals. And now, let's hear some of my dad's words as he speaks to us.
People are asking me another question. How come there's so many thousand died and you are still alive? So I say, well, God wanted to have a witness to tell the story. Nobody could believe it. So he left a few of us alive that we can tell what's happened.
Felicia Wirtz, whose original name was Fega Smolarczyk, was born in Bishkov, Poland. She's not sure of her birth date, however the date April 24th, 1937 was given to her on her birth certificate. Felicia was orphaned at the age of 3, and she and her younger brother were sent to live in an orphanage. Her uncle Isaac arranged to send the children to an orphanage in northern Russia because of the war situation, thus saving their lives. Felicia's brother was adopted soon after their arrival. Felicia spent the war years at the orphanage. In 1946, Felicia was taken with some other children to an orphanage in central Russia. She found out she was Jewish after coming to Poland because she was unable to recite the Lord's Prayer. Soon a woman came from the Jewish Joint Distribution Committee and took her to a Jewish orphanage near Warsaw. Felicia was present at the unveiling of the Warsaw Ghetto Monument in 1948. Also in 1948, Felicia went to another Jewish orphanage in Lodz. She remained there until 1955 when she finished high school. At that point, she traveled to Leningrad for college to study history. She also learned English while in Russia. Felicia found through the Polish Red Cross that her uncle Isaac and his family was living in Poland. In that same year, they decided to search for her brother through the Red Cross. She was reunited with her brother and brought him to Poland. In 1969, her brother got married and moved to Sweden. In 1966, she moved to the United States. She was a lecturer of Polish and Russian languages at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. She married Mr. Wirtz in 1969, and they had 2 daughters, Anya and Melanie. They came to St. Louis after Mr. Wirtz received his PhD and got a job at Washington University as the assistant professor of Russian language and linguistics. Felicia remains close to her daughters and family in Sweden.
Sister Prince interviewed me in 1986, and I'm very thankful because nobody interviews anybody in Poland because everybody is a Holocaust survivors. So I was born in Wyszków, Poland, a town close to Warsaw. When Germans invaded Vyshkov, I was 2 years old. Jewish families were forced to leave town and move east to the Russian border. Why? Because Russia has a pact of non-aggression with Germany. So war was coming from the west, you move east. I come from a very religious family. In Russia, we were refugees, unreliable, and they sent us to an exile to the northern Russia to work in felling trees without proper clothing, implements, and food. It was sort of a forced labor camp. And so I spent my Holocaust years in northern and central Russia. Sister asked me, what do you remember as a 3 or 4-year-old? The first thing I remember, that we were 4 of us. My brother, little brother, was 2 years old, me, my uncle was 16 years old, and my mother, probably she was in her 20s. The best thing which I remember is the death of my mother. I remember it very vividly. We slept in the same bed. I was probably 4 years old. And in the middle of the night, I had to go to the bathroom, which was outdoor and it was dead winter. I started to wake her up, but she didn't respond. So I started to cry louder and louder. And I woke up all the dorm. Then I saw women crying, and later on a big wooden box, you understand. So my mother died, and he is an uncle, 16-year-old with 2 little children. So he arranged to put us in the orphanage in Kon. Also, I don't know, the same year, but it was in winter, I saw, it was a very dark winter afternoon, and I saw that a woman, Russian woman, was putting my little brother on a little sleigh, and they went away. Well, nowadays we understand was she adopted him or she was given my brother, and I have never seen him till 1964. I found him through the Red Cross. Then I was moved to a different orphanage, and that was in central Russia, and I lived there through the war. What do I remember next? This is the year 1946. Sister asked me, what do you remember about the year 1946? In 1946, the whole orphanage moved to Poland. I was 9 years old, and when we arrived there, I noticed that I'm different, because all the girls and some boys were praying, going to church. I didn't know what it was all about. They would kneel in the evening and say prayers, and I didn't know the word Jewish even. And one day the caretaker gathered us and said, there's a list of girls to be fitted for white dresses. My name was not on that list. I asked why. She said, you are Jewish. The girls had to go to confirmation, Holy Communion. I realized it's something bad, but I didn't realize it was Jewish. A month later, a Jewish from the Joint Jewish Committee came. She was a Jewish woman. I remember her name, Mrs. Erna. And she said, I'm taking Jewish children from this orphanage to a Jewish orphanage in Warsaw. And I said, no way, I don't want to be Jewish, I'm not going there. And I hid for 3 days. But they found me, she persuaded me to go. And I remember we were going to Warsaw in a terribly crowded, overcrowded train. In the compartments were about 20 people, which is usually for 8. and children on the floor. And usually in apartments, people start talking, usually, it's long overnight trip. And what was the conversation about? That those Jews, there's so many of them, they didn't kill everybody. They come in from underground like rats. Don't you realize how we felt? Yeah. So we arrived to a Jewish orphanage. I know the name. I remember I stayed there for 2 years. It was a beautiful place. There was a welcome wagon. A girl came to me and said, everybody here is Jewish, and I'll show you around. And here I see children playing volleyball. They look very nice. So I asked her, are these nice looking kids also Jewish? She said, yes, everybody's Jewish here. And by the way, she asked me, what's your name? I said, Fagin. Oh, you're going to be Felicia. But Felicia number 3, because we already have 2 fights. And as you know, 1946 was a bad year in Poland, because in July of that year, there was a pogrom in Kielce. And I know in that year, we had the guards who were guarding our orphanage were given guns. Thank you.
To present our guest of honor, we'll have Jean Cavender come back. And hey, there she is. Welcome.
Actually, no, we're going to do the presentation. We want to finish with Sister. We're going to do the presentation out in the atrium.
We shall do that. All right. All right, so please welcome our guest of honor, the reason we're all here, Sister Prince.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so glad you're all here. Thank you so much for coming. Oh, should I do it again? No. All right. Okay. Where should I put this? Right here? Okay. All right. All right. Well, anyway, I am glad you're here. I have taken a most unusual journey. Can you hear me? Yes. All right. Not by railway, bus, or car, but by listening in a quiet room. I have been led back in time by people who lived in another world, one that bears no resemblance to where we are now, how we think or feel. I have absorbed their lives into my very being, into my skin, my head, and my soul, and yet their memories possess me. I can never know what it was like for them. They live in my life. I cannot live in their lives. But then, why does it seem as I do? They have told me where they were born, their parents, brothers, sisters, their towns and cities and shtetls. How they had no clocks in the house, how they were late for school, and how they learned to ice skate, their experiences in Cheder, and their childhood fears. I looked at them as they spoke, watching their faces, their hands, their eyes, all of their physical beings, and I wondered what they looked like as children, how their voices sounded in their native language, where they could express themselves before they saw the unspeakable darkness on which they had to focus. How did they dress? Were they loved and cherished by their parents? And how they had to put their happy lives behind them? And why are they telling me these memories? I wept inside as I am doing now. Let us first talk about their happy memories. They became almost like children as they described their homes, how they dressed, and how they lived. Their eyes lit up as they remembered what their mother and father said to them, how they played with their classmates. Their eyes changed and darkened as they told how non-Jews called them names. However, I was not alone in these conversations. In the beginning, many of our interviewers patiently, lovingly, and carefully interviewed these giving people who wanted the truth of the horror to be known. So in these oral histories, now available on our website for all to access, their voices will be heard, their words will be read, their faces will be seen, and their testimonies will be told. Each survivor found their own personal way to live with their past. Asking them to be interviewed, to have their past, asking them to be interviewed, to have their memories preserved, was their sole drive to survive. When I asked a survivor what it meant to be interviewed, she replied that someone else would learn what happened to me when I was gone. It was not the first time I had to talk, but it was the first chance I had for somebody to really listen. It was getting something out of my gut. And as the person interviewing her, I knew what she meant. Finally, someone cared. They felt the cruelties of their suffering, their losses, and their agony, which they endured, now will not be forgotten. Their voices became our outreach program, because they wanted the world to know how it was to live in that way at that time. And now we will all be able to hear their oral histories. And one voice, Hilda Lebanon, in April of 1995 said, "Nobody was there when I got out telling me it was all right. Nobody was there to help me heal. Nobody was there to see that I am hurting. And nobody was there to bring me back to sanity." Harry Langa once said to the students of Millville High School, "I hope you will repeat my stories to your children, and then they would be the eyewitnesses to tell future generations that things like this happen, and never again should something like this happen." Oscar Jacobs said, "Hardly a day goes by that I don't remember the concentration camps." Anne Langa once told me, "For you, it was 50 years. For me, it was yesterday." I have met such wonderful people through this project. Anna Gruber, Anna Gruber, a survivor from Poland, was introduced to me after watching a disturbing film called Night in Fog at Webster Theater. I gave her a hug and said, "My name is Sister Prince. It's a nickname. My real name is Vida." Either she didn't hear me or didn't understand my words, because Anna hugged me back and said, "It's a wonderful country where you can kiss a nun." Anna and I often smiled about this story and hugged. It took great strength for survivors to build new lives, and so many did. Think of their feelings, wanting to remember and wanting to forget while preparing for you to come to their homes to be interviewed. even after liberation, one survivor said, "We were all sick. Now on the outside, we look normal, but on the inside, how could we be? We are grieving. There are no words to describe what they did to us. We won't be able to trust again." How does it happen that I should go to their homes and hear their stories about their lives, their lovely childhood memories, their torments and their nightmares? And above all, the last time they saw their mother. The last time they saw their mother. The last time. It needs to be repeated over and over and over again. Gradually, gently, step by step, they learn to live again, to love again, to rebuild their lives. They came to America and learned a new language. They worked hard with dignity and hope, raising money for their families. The impact of their testimonies will not end with the final interview of the last survivors. Their words that are spoken are a living legacy and will be passed on. As for me, where did all of their words I heard go? Into my mind and heart, into my very being. Some days my eyes still fill with tears, and my throat closes up with my thoughts and the visions of the unimaginable that was done to them by the Nazis. The unimaginable that was done by them, by the Nazis. There are still and always will be deniers. Saving these interviews allows these precious voices and their memories to bear witness to cruelties impossible to believe. These tapes are preserved so that students, scholars, and other interested individuals can listen, learn, research, write about, teach others about the Holocaust. These voices are the heart and soul of all of our efforts. And again, from the account of Stefan Ernst, and they will ask if this is the truth. I will answer in advance, no, this is not the truth. It is only a small part, a fraction of the truth. The essential truth, the real truth cannot be described even with the most powerful pen. And as I conclude this afternoon, I want to leave you with this last thought, a quote from a French poet, Paul Éluard. If the echoes of their voice fades, we will perish. I want to thank you, and I thank you again. Everybody in this building, it took everybody all through the years to put things together. It didn't happen for one person, 3 persons, 6 persons. It was all of us, okay? Thank you so much.